Something strange happens to those who begin to awaken. At first, there's a glow, a good kind of restlessness, a hunger for answers, for meaning, for transcendence. But then, silently, a new prison arises, more subtle, more elegant, and almost impossible to notice. It has no bars, no shackles. It has beautiful phrases, elevated concepts. It has words like frequency, manifestation, fifth dimension. It has certainty. And that's where many stop growing, because they trade ignorance for the illusion of knowing everything. This is the most dangerous mistake on the entire spiritual journey, believing that simply knowing is the same as awakening, but it's not. True awakening is not gentle nor automatic. It's brutal. It's you falling apart while still breathing. It's recognizing that your noblest beliefs may actually be just sophisticated versions of fear. And the one who understood this before anyone else was Socrates. He walked through the streets of Athens, challenging wise men, politicians, teachers, and disciples, not with insults, nor with answers, but with a much more dangerous weapon, questions that cut the soul. The name of his method was myutics, a birth of consciousness, where what was born was not an idea, but a new you. Today, more than 2,000 years later, the world is full of words, but thirsty for truth. And if you stay with me over the next few minutes, you'll discover why myutics is the most forgotten tool of true awakening, and how it can implode the certainties that still keep you trapped even when everything seems enlightened. This is the point where many get lost, not because of ignorance, but because of conviction. The journey, which began as a sincere calling, ends up becoming a stage where the ego changes costume. Out goes worldly vanity, in comes the cloak of spiritual superiority. Now, everything seems to make sense. The universe responds, the signs appear, synchronicity becomes routine. But, little by little, that comfortable sense of security turns into anesthesia, a kind of numbness disguised as clarity. What once was a search becomes a doctrine. Restlessness gives way to rigid knowing, and what once was a living spirit becomes a system. You hear someone say, "We are all energy." Reality is a reflection of the mind. You attract what you vibrate. All good, all beautiful, all true. But, do you still believe it because you feel it? Or because you got used to it? It's easy to repeat mantras, harder to question them. Even easier is to fall in love with your own ideas and mistake that for enlightenment. Few admit that along the way they started pretending they already knew. Or worse, they stopped asking questions. And it was exactly against that Socrates rebelled. He didn't confront the ignorance of the uneducated, but the arrogance of the educated. Those who read, taught, gave speeches, but didn't know how to think from within. For him, the real danger wasn't in the lack of knowledge, but in the illusion that enough had already been learned. And you can feel the weight of that today, in plasticized spirituality, in social media philosophy, in ready-made speeches about awakening, ascension, frequency, duality, and ego. The problem isn't in the words, but in the way we hide behind them, how we protect ourselves from the abyss with beautiful phrases, hoping the surface will take us to the depths. But without the abyss, there is no dive. Without doubt, there is no expansion. And without the courage to ask what lies behind certainty, there is no truth. There is only echo. That's why Socratic wisdom remains so necessary. Because it doesn't give us ground, it removes the ground we lean on out of laziness. And it's only in that emptiness that something new can be born. But birth, in itself, was never simple. Socrates knew that better than anyone. And perhaps that's why he chose the metaphor of childbirth to describe the process he proposed. Maiutics, that was the name. The term may sound strange today, but what it carries is brutally current. While so many try to fill the mind with information, Socrates proposed the opposite, to empty it of certainties. He didn't offer answers, he offered questions, and they had the power to destabilize even the most convinced. Imagine someone approaching you, not to teach, but to lead you to realize that maybe you've never really thought. It's uncomfortable, almost offensive, but it's that discomfort that reveals what was hidden behind the memorized words. Maiutics is not a gentle technique. It's surgical. It doesn't give you wisdom. It rips from you everything that isn't wisdom, and that's where the secret lies. The process isn't based on confronting others, but on confronting yourself through simple, almost innocent questions, yet with the power of dynamite. Why do you believe that? Who taught you that idea? Did it come from your experience or from repetition? What if it's wrong? Socrates did this with disconcerting elegance. He led dialogues as if he didn't know, but that not knowing was his trump card. It was he who truly saw. While others spoke to convince, he asked to reveal. And when the other finally admitted they didn't know, the conversation stopped being an exchange of vanities and became an encounter with the real. Maiutics is that rare kind of tool. It doesn't impose, it doesn't sell, it doesn't go mainstream, because it demands what few are willing to offer: deconstruction. In a world where knowledge is a commodity and opinion has become identity, asking deeply is almost an act of subversion. Think about the last discussions you saw on the internet. How many times did someone ask an honest, open question, seeking to understand? Almost never. Everyone speaks, few listen. Everyone wants to win, few want to understand. Maiutics is the opposite of that. It's you letting go of the need to be right. It's accepting the possibility that what you call I might just be a collection of accumulated certainties, but never examined, and that's why it hurts. Not because it causes physical pain, but because it stirs deep structures where the ego hides and grows strong. Its effects aren't immediate like a sharp argument. They act in silence, like a question that keeps echoing in your mind days later, corroding certainties without you realizing it. Is this really my path? Or did I just settle into it? What makes me repeat these ideas? Am I seeking truth or validating my comfort zone? These are questions no one can answer for you. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. Because when taken seriously, they dismantle entire narratives. Narratives you may have built with great effort, that served as shelter, that protected wounds, but that now limit you. Maiutics reveals this. It doesn't teach you how to live. It shows where you stopped living and started merely repeating. Maybe that's why Socrates was hated, not for his ideas, but for his power to rip off masks. He was, too many, an unwanted mirror, and few accept to see who they really are when all the mental makeup is removed. Today, you don't have to be on the streets of Athens to live this process. You just have to stop, breathe, observe what you believe, and ask, did this come from me? Or was it installed in me? Be honest in your answer, because it's exactly at that point that consciousness begins to expand, not through complex rituals, nor through mystical promises, but with a question planted in the right place, at the right moment. True spirituality is not afraid of doubt. It needs it. Without doubt, everything becomes religion, even self-knowledge. And maybe, if you've made it this far, it's because a part of you is already ready to ask what you've never had the courage to say out loud. Sometimes, All it takes is one sincere question for everything that seems solid to begin to dissolve. But what keeps most people from asking that question is the automatic way they live. It's not a lack of intelligence, nor a lack of spirituality. It's habit, it's repetition, it's script. The mind learns early to conserve energy, and for that, it turns even the greatest awakenings into predictable routines. You start by hearing something that makes sense. You feel a real impact. But soon that idea becomes a comfort zone. Repetitions turn into mantras. Beliefs become absolute truths. And before you realize it, you're living with new words, but the same mechanism as before. Only now, instead of news or political opinions, you repeat phrases like, "Everything is frequency." "I already understand the law of attraction." "We are in the fifth dimension." And the worst part, you believe that's thinking. But real thinking requires friction. It requires presence. It's like breathing consciously. You do it all the time, but without noticing. Thinking, feeling, and even believing also become automatisms. This is where myutics reveals its true strength. Because it's not just for dismantling intellectual beliefs. It's meant to cut the invisible threads that keep your consciousness trapped, even when you swear you're free. Imagine applying this method to the decisions you make every day. Did you choose this path, or did you just follow it because it was the most accepted? Does this relationship nourish you, or does it simply repeat the absence you already knew? Does your spirituality free you, or does it just comfort you? These questions don't need to be answered out loud, but they must be asked with courage. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that autopilot isn't just external. It lives inside your spiritualized mind, camouflaged by good intentions. That's why it's so dangerous. It doesn't push you toward evil. It traps you in what seems too good to question. And just as Socrates challenged priests, philosophers, and ordinary citizens, you too can challenge the master that lives inside you, the one who answers everything too quickly, who already has an opinion about everything, and who never stops to ask, "But what if I'm just repeating another way of being asleep?" See how this shows up in everyday life. You feel anger and justify it. You feel fear and rationalize it. You avoid a step and convince yourself it's intuition. But when you stop, truly stop and apply myutics to your own emotional world, something changes. You trade judgment for investigation. You trade automatic explanation for silent listening. And you begin to realize that much of what you call intuition might just be spiritualized conditioning. Spirituality, when not questioned, becomes a sophisticated trap. You don't feel like you're trapped because you believe you've already left the prison. But the hardest cell to break is the one painted with colors of light. That's why the practical application of myutics is so urgent. It doesn't require books, nor masters. It only requires that you don't accept your first answer. Apply this method in your next difficult conversation. Instead of reacting, ask, "What in me is being touched by this? Why did that statement bother me? Which part of me feels the need to defend itself?" Or, when facing a decision that feels a little too clear, stop and ask, "Am I choosing out of conviction or just avoiding discomfort?" With each well-asked question, you remove a layer of noise, and what remains is lucid silence, inner space, wordless clarity. This is the kind of consciousness no one can give you. It only arises when you commit to doubt. Honest doubt, not corrosive. The kind that doesn't destroy for pleasure, but out of a need for truth. Socrates called it birth. Today, you might call it rebirth, but the name doesn't really matter. What matters is that, little by little, the autopilot begins to fail. And in place of the conditioned reflex, a conscious response is born. But conscious responses come at a price. They demand that something in you must die. It's not a symbolic, conceptual, or poetic death. It's an internal collapse, an abrupt end to the image you cultivated of yourself. Because to reach truth, it's necessary to let go not only of what is false, but also of what seemed too true to be questioned. Socrates understood this with a lucidity that was frightening. He didn't just ask questions, he lived within them. And because of that, he was seen as a threat. Not because he said what he thought, but because he made others think what they never had the courage to say. He was accused of corrupting the youth, but all he did was teach them how to think. He challenged beliefs, structures, myths, and exposed the fragility of ideas that, until then, had seemed indestructible. In a world that valued consensus and obedience, he introduced discomfort, and he paid for it, not with arguments, not with exile, but with his own life. When he was sentenced to death, he had the chance to back down, to deny what he was doing, to apologize and preserve his existence. But he didn't, because to him, living without seeking truth was a slow way to die. And that may be the most overlooked point of spiritual awakening. There is no enlightenment without loss. Something in you must fall. It must collapse. It must unravel with the same intensity with which, before, you believed in it. It's not a light process, nor a pretty one. It's uncomfortable, lonely, almost always silent, but it's real. While many seek easy answers, Socrates offered necessary doubts, and in the end, his greatest contribution wasn't a specific teaching, it was the courage to live without clinging to any certainty. That stance is rare, and even rarer is the willingness to adopt it, because the ego panics in the face of emptiness. It wants to hold on to something, anything, so it doesn't disappear. And so, it clings to ideas, names, methods, doctrines, gurus. But the seeker who truly awakens is the one who learns to let go of all that, to accept the collapse, to step into the darkness without a map, and to walk anyway. It's at this point that Ayurveda transforms from technique into path, because questioning is not just thinking better, it's allowing yourself to dissolve, so that something greater can emerge. There may be no immediate reward. You might lose friends, references, certainties, but in their place, you gain something that can't be bought: living clarity. And once you experience that, you can no longer live on autopilot. You no longer tolerate ready-made answers. You no longer accept pretending, because something inside you has died. And finally, what remains is truth. Everything said up to now only has value if put into practice. Ayurveda is not a distant philosophy. It doesn't live in ancient books, nor does it belong only to the masters of the past. It is in the now, every time you choose not to accept the obvious as truth. Because the reality around you, the habits you repeat, the beliefs you carry, none of that was written in stone. It was shaped, little by little, by voices that perhaps weren't even yours. But today, you have the chance to rewrite that script, to pause the autopilot, and begin building a new level of consciousness, one that doesn't depend on ready-made answers, but on the courage to ask the right questions. Ayurveda can be applied when you feel something intense and decide to investigate the root instead of just reacting. It can be used in important conversations when you trade judgment for genuine curiosity, or in your moments of silence when doubt is no longer discomfort, but a portal. It's not about changing the whole world at once. It's about changing the way you see each part of it. As Nietzsche said, Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies, and Socrates already knew that centuries before. That's why he wouldn't let you answer in a hurry. He would simply look at you in silence until you yourself realized how much you still don't know. And that, far from being a problem, is the real beginning of awakening. You don't need more certainties. You need more lucidity. And lucidity is born from well-directed doubt. So if all that remains after this video is a single question, one that won't let you sleep, one that echoes inside you with no easy answer, then this video has fulfilled its mission. Because whoever dares to question what they've always believed has already begun to be reborn. If this content resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It shows us that you want to go deeper. Write in the comments, "I choose the doubt that sets me free, not the certainty that imprisons me." Share this video with someone who also needs to break the cycle of automatic thinking. And click on the screen now to watch another transformative video. Remember, true awakening is not comfortable. It is inevitable when you choose honesty over convenience.